All right, welcome. I'd like to call to order the Ramsey-Washington Metro Watershed District March meeting. At first, let's go ahead and move to the approval of the agenda. Before we do that, we're going to make a edit to the agenda. We're going to propose an edit. So I think we need a motion to move. Is that correct?
So I will suggest that we remove the minutes. We have a change on the minutes. So we'll remove that from the consent agenda and put it in action item 8E. And then also I just let Val and those of you that heard know that we will not be doing the community survey results presentation. So we'll strike that from the agenda. We'll come next month.
We move the minutes to action item 8E. Second.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Can we have an approval or motion to approve the agenda with the proposed changes?
Motion to approve with changes.
Second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Wonderful. All right, moving forward, we're going to option item number 3, Ramsey-Washington Metro Watershed District Board Manager Oath of Office.
And Lauren is here. Lauren, are you going to administer the oath for us tonight?
Yes, I'm happy to. So I'll have you all raise your right hands, please. And, oh gosh, I'm having trouble. All right, and so instead of saying your individual names, you can just say I and then move on to the next. Do you have it in front of you?
Yes, they do. Yeah.
Okay. So this is my first time administering the oath, but I'll do my best. So I'll just have you repeat after me as I go along. So I do solemnly swear that I support the Constitution of the United States.
I do solemnly swear that I support the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the State of Minnesota,
the Constitution of the State of Minnesota,
and that I will faithfully, justly, and impartially discharge the duties of the office of manager.
That I will faithfully, justly, and impartially discharge the duties of the office of manager
of the Ramsey-Washington Metro Watershed District.
Of the Ramsey-Washington Metro Watershed District.
Ramsey and Washington Counties, Minnesota, to the best of my judgment and ability.
Ramsey and Washington Counties, Minnesota, to the best of my judgment and ability.
All right, thanks you guys. I'll get better at that.
Good job, Lauren.
But then yes, you can have them signed and I can take them and we'll file.
Do we have to next month do it for Matt?
Yeah, we'll have next week. So Matt's not here tonight.
Wonderful. Moving forward to the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Do I have a second? Further discussion or questions on the consent agenda? Okay, wonderful. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
I think we have a couple of visitors. Am I remembering?
Randy is there. Yes, Randy, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Randy Edmondson. I'm on the CAC.
Oh, perfect. Hi, Randy. Okay. Looking forward to visitor comments. I assume there are no visitor comments.
Did you have any comments that you wanted to?
This is the second, on Monday I did court watch. Well, I guess that's my job here too.
Perfect.
No, thank you. I wanted to see what.
We will have fun. I like it. Let's go to moving on to item 6, permit program. And I'll pass it to you, Nicole.
Good evening. The one permit that moved forward this month was included on the consent agenda. And then the enforcement report. For Stephanie, this is kind of a monthly inclusion in our board packet that just kind of describes what activities, meetings, any construction site updates and violations that occurred over the previous month. So we had a handful of violations, a lot of meetings and trainings this month. And then you'll notice a higher number of permit closures. I was trying to clean up our permit list, some projects that didn't move forward. So notifying applicants that they've been kind of just sitting there too long. So if they do decide to move forward in the future, they'll have to reapply for a permit, as well as some of our older projects that have been completed and closed out on the contract end. But I'd be happy to take any questions on project or site updates, if there are any.
Could I, I'll start us off, and I know we generally have a few different topic points, but I've seen this consistently twice now that we have, you know, the weather is surprisingly warm. It's having an impact, I think, here, and then in the program summaries there, you know, it says, hey, there's some items that are moving out. Are you keeping a list of some of those, Nicole, at all, or at what point does it become a problem, out of curiosity?
Can you explain what items or what moving out?
Yeah, so it was,
I'm not
as we were
understanding.
looking at, the site's been diligent, oh, where is it? I was looking at the Bailey Nursery 2323. And what
Sure.
I had started thinking through is there's probably going to be some upsets in timelines for these. And I didn't know if that was important for us to keep track of, or if there's any issues that we'd have to mitigate because of the warm winter that we had. I was curious specifically on permits. That's what I was asking about. And if the answer is no,
Yeah.
then that's great. I just didn't know.
Yeah, as far as delays on other entities or companies' projects, you know, we'll just keep inspecting as the temperatures warrant. And we have been continuing to inspect this winter, especially because there is a lot of activity going on. Ironically, as you'll see with this Bailey Nursery, they needed it to get cold and frozen, while a lot of other sites like this warm weather so they can continue earthwork. But yeah, we're keeping on top of any sites that are active and are adjusting inspection frequency based on the weather and based on our findings. But you know, it's not as, there's no real impact on our staff if like another permit applicant's project gets delayed. The same permit timeframes for like soil stabilization and maintenance applies regardless. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was looking for.
Okay.
I was just curious.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you.
Moving on to the stewardship grant programs, item 7. Paige.
Yes, so you approved a few applications today. Stephanie, a little bit of background on this report. So you'll see this every month. I update it just to show what funds have been allocated for the year. So it's kind of broken down by our different project types and award amounts. Definitely, if there's anything you want to see, you know, feel free to let me know. I'll try to fit it if I can. So you'll see a couple markings here. If there's funds, so I include the funds that were approved tonight, so those are noted, and then also any staff approval. So any application that comes in that's under $5,000 is just approved at a staff level. So those are noted on here, and then you keep track of our maintenance grants, consultant fees. So we work with BAR, obviously, Washington Conservation District, and then Ramsey Soil and Water for our stewardship grant program. So those fees are in there just to help us or help me stay on track for the year.
So on the public art stuff, saw that they've talked through signage later on in the packet. How are we advertising the public art piece in terms of Leadership grant, because it
Yeah.
seems like it's a really nice way to engage the public. And I just-
Yeah, so it's on our website. I don't know that we advertise it. We have someone here who has used it a lot for a few projects. It's more, so the idea with it is that it should be tied to, a restoration area or a stewardship grant project. So typically if a project comes in and the applicant is asking about signage, or we think it's a good spot for public art, we'll make sure to.
So it's really
about it.
just in the process of looking at the other locations. for grant.
Yep.
I'm sorry, so this is the bucket that signage also comes out of?
Yes, yep,
And there was I think a Boys and Girls Club, is that correct?
yep, yep.
So. But maybe. I can tell you what the Boys and Girls Club is doing for signage.
Oh, sure. So I think it just takes one board member to recognize,
you
yeah,
can-
after you.
So in the original plan, the two sculptures that are there are in the native planting that they did the stewardship grant for. And there is in the planning of a plaque that will go there to explain the purpose of those. I don't know if you've read the scripture from at Ames Lake on the stone that explains the relationship. So it's gonna be something, again, tying nature and neighborhood, but in particular for the teens.
It's very cool. I just wanted,
They actually are paying for that plaque. We just we haven't finished that yet.
it's such a nice way to engage the public. And I don't think those are just gonna come out, you know what I mean? But yes, that's what I want to ask. Any further questions for Kate? Hey,
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Because it came up in the CAC. There was just some general questioning on how the staff intends to advertise and go about the equity area grants. I don't know if that's coming later, if that's been discussed.
Yeah, not as much as, I mean, I've had a few conversations with Lauren. I think we're still looking through
Still
how we
working
want
through
to
all that.
advertise it. Yeah.
It's a
Not
tough
enough of an
question, I
answer
know.
right now, yes. So I'm looking at projects as they come in, and applying it on that level, kind of, I guess at this point. But something we need to talk more about.
Sure.
I'd love to hear more about it. It's a great question. Because
Yeah,
I don't think they're the ones who are gonna openly go out and seek for this type of stuff.
right.
Good question. Any further questions? Okay, let's move forward to action items. I'll hand it to you.
Yeah, so our first action item we have on here is the bylaws and board governance document approval. You've seen this document a few times now, and since our last meeting, I did receive Ernest and from Lauren, our attorney as well. So I made some cleanup, mostly they were cleanup and nothing, I would say, substantially changed on it. But this would be the final draft for your proposal. And just as a reminder, the bylaws changes, again, some cleanup, some modernization as far as we can go, even though the statute is very not modernized. So as far as we could go on that, and then officially changing our annual meeting to be the March meeting tonight, as we've been operating.
Stephanie, just for your benefit, we had started this conversation about 6 months ago, mainly because, when you look at other watershed districts, the board of managers do a lot of heavy lifting. And we're fortunate to have, an administrator and a strong staff that helps. And so really trying to illustrate what it is the board is meant to do is what the intention was, knowing that we're kind of, our Metroplex is kind of.
And it's a nice document to have as a board too, to remind you of your role as a board member, overseeing this organization, in policy and goal setting and, advising staff on.
I just
I wanted to say that, you know, when we first saw this, it was, a lot of the pieces were there, a little rough around the edges in a few places, but I think it's really, shaped nicely, and, it will certainly help in places of question, you know, like, how should we really be approaching something like this? You know, what is our role? What is the expectations? It would certainly be a good thing to run.
Yeah, and I think it, you know, once we have it in place now here too, it'll be something we'll annually review too, so we can bring it back. So again, it's front of mind, and also, you know, look to see if any changes we want to make to it, so.
As I was thinking through this, and I agree with everything Mark said, this follows the same update guidance where a proposal happens and we still make a motion, right? So we can do that at any time, whereas I just wanted to double check. I appreciated you actually printing out the answers to questions that I sent as well as part of it, so it gave me a lot of confidence when I read it. What are your thoughts, Ben?
It's a solid document, and don't need to reiterate, but a lot of good work. Didn't have any additional comments.
Well, I believe I need a motion to approve the bylaws and board governance document.
I would motion that the board approve the Ramsey-Washington Metro Watershed District bylaws and board governance document.
Second that motion.
Any further discussion?
I have one quick question, on the topic of any revisions. And this is probably, not that I have any in mind, but just looking forward and considering, is it something that would have to be done on a, you know, an annual basis, or if something comes up, could we request changes sort of at any time?
Yeah, you could request changes at any time.
I think we would just, so it'd come up, what I would recommend is it would come up in the comment section as we walk through it, and we can make a motion with that.
Excellent, that's what I was thinking would be the best approach.
That's perfect. Wonderful. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Board of Managers Annual Meeting. This is where we get to elect. After you, I'll let you kick it off.
Oh, no, you can go right ahead. There's a number of items here. 4 items.
Yep.
So there's 4 different, you know, recommendations, as you see stated there. I think in the past, it's been helpful to walk through them kind of one by one. These are the official business of the annual meeting. So yeah, the first one is election of officers.
Election of officers. Okay, so in the past, what I recall is we nominate either ourselves or somebody else to run these particular roles. I will say that I am very open and willing to run as president again in this instance. I think we have an open position. Pam leaving, vice president plays an important role interacting with the staff, and Tina, it's a very important role in my opinion because they also provide backup and is very helpful. So we are looking for people who want to be either president. So let's start with that one. Other people who want to be nominated.
You've done a great job. If you want to continue.
I would love to continue.
I will say, just add that I asked Matt and he said he was very flexible. He's willing to continue as treasurer or do anything really.
Yeah.
But then he also gave his support to Val.
Man, I had a whole speech for like 30 minutes. I don't have to.
The lobbyist.
In truth, I'm really excited about the changes to the water management plan as we look forward over the tenure, and I would love to work with you all through that. That would be an honor of mine. Vice President, let's move to Vice President. Any?
I would throw my hat in the ring.
I was considering throwing my head in the ring, so if you.
I don't mind a challenge. We can let the other board members.
Paper, rock,
Challenge, sure.
I don't care how we decide, don't bow just because there's another nominee.
I've got a quarter.
Yeah. So was that a you're in, you're out?
I'm in.
You're in, you're in.
There you go.
And okay. So we probably we're not gonna vote for each of them individually. Is it possible for you to both express your interest in the vice president and kind of rationale? Does that make some sense to do?
Well, they're both, right, been
Mhm.
nominated now.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I think a vote, I guess, Lauren, I don't know how
especially without five. That makes it harder.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think since they're both nominated, there'd be a vote on each. And then if the vote is split, I'm gonna have to consult my Robert's rules. So I'd have to go to the next position maybe and see from there.
Who has managed people before?
I have managed crew, staff, you know, to perform actual physical labor and not a manager of people in an office setting. I guess you're looking for some background why we're, so I'll just do that. I've enjoyed my time on the board, you know, I've kind of tried to get involved with as many things as possible, going to different conferences. Coordinating and staff at that level, always interested in helping out more in the way that I can. I think it's a unique position that you're able to do that. And it would also provide me the opportunity to learn more about the organization and become more involved. So that's why I'm volunteering for the position.
Mark.
Yeah, I served over the last year as a member at large, member of the board, without being an officer, and I've contemplated and enjoyed that. I've learned a lot, and I thought that I'd be interested in assuming an officer role. Vice president had been the one vacancy, so I've been thinking about it. And in terms of my experience, I have not been a manager directly, though like Ben, I have managed crews outside the office, in the office, so this is kind of a lead worker type concept. I have hired people and on hiring panels a number of times. I have done reviews of people in association with other supervisors. So I feel comfortable in the role of vice president in terms of the duties that are put forth and expected for that role.
It's gonna be very difficult, so I have very high respect for both of you. I don't think I could pick, all right. So we have to vote for the nominee?
Yeah.
Yes. So,
Oh, go ahead.
yes. So just for clarification on the rules, if there is a tie, first of all, you can choose whether you want to do a private vote, which you could do. So Val, you'd submit it to a vote, whether that's in the group or if you want to do it privately. And then if there is a tie, then you could choose to vote again. But if that's a tie after that, then you could also move to table the vote until next meeting when there are 5 managers present.
Am I allowed to, so would secretary entertain either of you?
What was the question?
So there's another role, secretary, that if Ben gets it, if Ben gets vice president, that position's open. If Ben stays secretary, then the vice president's open. What I'm hearing is Ben wants, okay. So we could do, we'll go ahead and do a vote.
Yeah, if they're both nominated, there needs to be a vote
Yep. Yeah,
regardless.
Yep.
You can either do that voice vote or we could do paper.
I mean, we're not really hiding anything, so let's do a voice vote.
Then I would just take a roll call, Val, just go one by one and ask for people's vote.
Okay, is it safe to assume that you two vote for each other, yourselves? Oh, no, wait, we have to do it. So Ben, what's your vote? Mark?
guess I would vote myself. Thank you.
I vote for Mark.
So I was gonna pick Ben. Okay, so that's a tie. So let's vote again. Correct, Lauren? Okay,
Yes.
Can I withdraw my nomination?
or you could just change your vote if you want it that way. I can explain myself after the vote. Okay, Ben,
Ben,
Mark,
I would vote again.
Stephanie,
And I'll support Ben.
and I will support that. So Ben's the nominee for vice president. I would nominate Mark for secretary or treasurer, whichever one you prefer. I nominate you for both of those.
I accept only one of them.
So why don't we jump to secretary, because that is now a vacated seat, and then we'll come back to treasurer. Secretary is a vacated seat. I nominate Mark.
Accept.
Anyone else? Okay, treasurer. Matt Kramer is not here. He's done the job last year. He is very open to not doing, as Tina highlighted. Okay, it's honestly perfectly normal. Jump into it. So I nominate Matt Kramer for treasurer. So can I have a motion to elect the president, vice president, treasurer, and secretary for 2024 without having to say the names? Can we have those written down, or do we need to say the names, Tina?
Nope, I've got Belle, Ben, Matt, and Mark.
So what I would request is a motion to approve that as a slate of officers and then take a vote on that slate.
Sounds good.
motion to approve the slate of officers as stated.
Perfect. Do I have a second?
I'll second that slate of officers.
Further discussion? You both are very well qualified for it. I was just thinking in terms of rotating through different positions. Matt did serve last year. I mean, Ben served last year. And I think that is a reasonable jump up. That is my rationale in my head. Thank you very much for both. So can I, all in favor, say aye?
Aye.
Number one. Number two, CAC membership, board liaison and activities.
Yeah, there was a document that was submitted by Carrie, and Carrie is on the Zoom call today too. If you have any questions or comments, I know all of you are very familiar with the CAC, and we have the membership that was currently serving that is interested in continuing to serve, as well as 2 new members that we're recommending to add to the roster for our CAC. I'm pretty excited to have 2 new applicants that came to us and with some really great background and experience. So we're looking forward to that. You'll see there that the leadership at the CAC was also voted on over this last month, and those were the 2, Randy, who's here, now the vice chair of the CAC. And then we also included a table, which is the work plan for the year for the CAC, and this is a little something new. We haven't had this in the packet before, but this gives you an idea of the items that both the CAC and staff are interested in pursuing over this next year. And so we'd like feedback from the board on those items. If you have any other ideas, suggestions, or if you want to include that in your approval. You'll see that we have them broken down on some kind of the bottom parts are ongoing things that have the CAC has either worked on or has done year to year. And then we have some items up above that are more specific for our items. We're very fortunate to have a very active and passionate CAC, and it's really great to, you know, be able to have items like use outreach and adoption, you know, some real beneficial projects and subjects for the staff and CAC and for the board to work on together. So yeah, if you have any questions or comments about that, we can take that as well. Carrie, anything you want to add?
No, I think you summarized it really well. Thanks, Tina.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
So thanks, Carrie. That it looks very nice to be able to put this in a table and you know, link it all the way back to what the management plan action items it links to. I guess I have one comment on the rightmost column, which is proposed outcomes and signs of success. I think it's a good start.
Yeah.
And my only comment there is kind of in my background, I guess, to measure the impact or the change. I think it's usually really a nice practice to have a measurable metric, and that means that you have to have a baseline. So
Yeah.
some numbers in there would be kind of cool, like, you know, for the number of adopted drain, instead of just more adoptees, it might be, you know, what our current numbers are and such.
Yep.
I'm not saying anything you don't know, so.
Nope. Yeah, I totally agree. I think the signs of success was kind of like the last column I was working on, because I think that needs to be kind of brainstormed, maybe hashing out more of that part of it with the CAC. Plus Lauren's doing a lot of baseline data, which with that neighborhood survey that I think some of that information might come into play. So it just wasn't ready to go to publish by the time I submitted that table. So yeah, thank you, Stephanie. That's a great idea.
Yeah, but just easy things to measure are the.
Yeah. Yep.
No, thanks.
Yep.
I was going to comment, I think this is very well laid out. I recognize there are a number of things that CAC has been working on for a while, which is good to see that continuity. And there are a number of new things as well, which I think really, to me, it seems one of the things that CAC, I think, needs to be open to new ideas. And so I'm really glad to see new ideas coming forward. And I really think that Stephanie had a great comment about the signs of success. So I don't know if this is something, Carrie, that had you collected comments from CAC, or was this largely staff generated? Maybe it's not fair to ask that.
I mean, it's a combination of a lot of them. I think the items towards the bottom of the table, the things that we've kind of done year after year, are the things you're probably most familiar with, kind of like the team building activities, community service, and kind of planting, buckthorn, things like that. Salt and adopt a drain, I believe, kind of came down from staff and the board. Stephanie took it really well and ran with a lot of ideas. So that became a stronger initiative, I'd say, in the last year and a half. So looking for more measurable outcomes for that would be great. Randy actually brought up the East Side relationship building. I think Randy, you can speak to this too, but has some of those relationships. So I think having her in leadership is going to help build those partnerships. So there is, a little bit of leadership change in the CAC. So I think that'll also, you'll see some shifts in ideas just from that. So I'm excited.
I think it's a really nice cross section of, coming from the board interests, CAC interests, making sure we're hitting both of those, and then having staff really lay out what is most helpful for staff as in these program areas as we move forward.
One thing that I don't see on here, and I don't know if it's been brought to the CAC, is something that they may have a role in, but I think it would be valuable for them to have input in the revision of the plan, the district plan, which is likely to begin, this year. So if that could be something that would be added to the slate.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there definitely will be things starting this year, but it'll really,
It'll really
the
ramp up
twenty twenty-five one will be.
next year is gonna
a
ramp
lot
up.
more.
But I think I mean, we'll kick off initial
Yep.
plan thoughts.
Yeah.
And I also like this because the CAC is kind of boots on the ground. I've been trying to figure out, and as you talk about signs of success, just number of communities reached or something like that. That's not a formal metric to work through, but I really like the idea of but here's my reason and rationale for why. I was chatting with a few other people around town, asking them if they've heard about the Ramsey-Washington Metro Watershed District. Do they know what they do? Do we know, what do they think about us? And in that conversation, they were like, well, I know things happen. I see construction. I just assume it's a city. And so as I think through what the CAC has the capability of doing, making sure that we continue that outreach and maybe not only proposing, hey, water is important, but also Ramsey-Washington's here to help and other mechanisms that would be very helpful. So I don't think it's something new or segmented. I'm just reinforcing that as a need.
Okay.
And I think we also need to nominate a liaison. I think, Ben, you've been doing it as a liaison from the board. Is there somebody who can, if you'd like to continue, or does somebody else would like to be a liaison to the CAC?
I'm open to continuing. I know we've got two very qualified board members who also came from the CAC. So if one of them has interest, I have no problem with them leading that work. One thing I will say is that it's really nice to have this open discussion at the board and everyone's feelings about what we communicate to the CAC and what we're kind of looking for, because there are times where they would turn to me and say, what does the board think about this? And our governance, like one member never speaks to the board, so I'd always, this is my own feelings. We have talked about it as a full board. So maybe even in minutes going forward, in months ahead of the CAC, we just set aside some time to discuss as a board what we're thinking as far as the CAC's workload, what they've accomplished, what we're thinking of directing them to do, so that it's not all on that liaison. And like I said, I would always say, this is me personally, the board hasn't discussed this, so it's not a board directive, but I know a lot of times they are looking for that kind of, what is the board looking for? And so if we as a group set that aside, then the liaison can directly say, hey, we discussed this and here's what we have.
I like it. So you're proposing adding it as potentially a standing board discussion topic prior to a CAC.
Yeah, so it'd only be, it wouldn't be every meeting, but ahead of those months where they're.
And I think
occurring.
then too, if you're hearing things from the CAC, you could bring that back to the
Yeah.
board too, so it can be.
Yeah, it can be a two-week street
added
there.
to the street.
Carrie used to provide a summary of the CAC meeting. Oh, she
Oh,
still
there
does.
she
Still
He
has,
does.
yeah.
Yeah, those are still in there.
But we should definitely comb through it and see if there's anything else in addition to that. But I think that makes sense for the liaison to be that conduit. We can bring it up in the board meeting. Is anybody other than Ben interested in supporting that? The key is,
The idea, yeah, I support it. I guess, looking at the CAC, priorities, the number one was to support the board, and so that was kind of a disconnect for some time, so I really think that would be a great idea.
Yeah, I think there's a real opportunity for improved kind of exchange and communication, which is what this is all about. So I certainly support it. I think it's.
how about a liaison to the CAC?
If you're willing, I would be willing to be I guess an alternative, a backup if you're not able, or Stephanie, if you are. So I appreciate your second vote.
Yeah, I'm still available. Like I said, if there's other interest from the board, I'm open to hearing changes or whatever.
No, I fully support you, Ben. I know other boards, they rotate,
Yep.
so if you ever feel like that's something you want to do.
When I first joined, what we ended up doing is if Ben couldn't do it, he would let Tina know and we would just coordinate. I think that's a good way of doing it. I do think cross-representation makes sense. From a personal standpoint, it's harder for me to do that, just to be very direct, but yeah, I think we'll nominate you as point person. If you cannot make it, it'd be wonderful if you can let Tina know and then we can coordinate a representative to be there.
Sure.
And I love the suggestions.
I would also say that I'm sure the CAC would be open to multiple board members attending, so if you wanna pop in, feel free.
Yeah, you're always welcome. They're open.
Awesome. So I
Although,
believe.
I'm sorry, I should say that if three.
Yeah, it can only be two.
Yeah, it could be two.
then I
Thank
would-
you, Tina. I was just gonna say the same thing.
Oh, man. Yes, that's true.
That was a good legal catch.
Thank you, Tina. So I believe we need a motion, right? Is that correct? So do I have a motion to approve the new and renew CAC membership, select board liaison, Ben, and approve the 2024 work plan suggestions, knowing that they're draft form?
Or ongoing.
Ongoing.
Yeah.
I would move that we appoint, recognize Ben as the liaison to the CAC, and that we show support and approve their slate of activities as presented. And membership as well. Thank you.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Hi.
Aye. Okay, consulting staff selection. We have to confirm our engineer, attorney, and accountant. I believe in the packet there was two proposals from an engineering firm standpoint. But I believe there's one proposal for attorney and accountant. Do we need further discussion, or do people want to discuss the Black and Veatch, thank you, sir, proposal?
I guess I would only say that I thought it was a strong proposal. I think they would be qualified to do the responsibility. It's very probably difficult to compete in a sense with our long-standing association with the district and fine work that they've done. So I just want to recognize their application.
You couldn't have said it better. So I agree everything with Mark said. The one thing that I'll add difference is what I've learned about this particular job and several others is that it's all about context. And if you really want to make right decisions, you need a little bit of the history or a lot of it of the history. And so the ability to answer questions all the way back to the 1980s, which in one instance I remember a conversation, really does make Bar a standout option as an engineer. I did like what they did. They have a more national presence. But in truth, I think what we have is what we need.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add that, we've really never wanted for more, you know, if we've had a problem or a concern or a topic, we've never needed to go outside of our, which is a real benefit to be able to say, hey, Brad, do you have somebody that can talk to us about PFAS? And, yep, we have, you know, an expert that can come in. And so it just feels like we really have, it's a really well-rounded firm that allows us to grow in different ways.
Yeah, I would also just add the accessibility factor, you know, you look at the lead staff from both of them, Bar's all right here. And then you're looking at Black and Beach and they're all over, which isn't a bad thing, but I think that's a huge positive to us to have Bar so local.
I did a pros and cons list in my head. I went with Bar, but as we think through things, what I really love about Bar was that, remember that summary where they compared all these different policies in terms of the inundation and the back and forth. What I maybe asking for, okay, the one thing that Black and Veatch bring is more of a cross United States viewpoint. We can just maybe pick a point to just add, but that's like something I would just ask you to do anyway. So I mean, I'm super happy.
I guess as a follow-up to that, and picking up on what Ben said, it seems Bar represents not only this district, but other watershed districts close by, you know, next to us and across town. And there's interactions that they hear and gain perspective that they can then bring to us. That is a real value. That's a strong asset, because I think though I'm interested in what's going on in Tallahassee or somewhere else, I'm more interested in probably what 9 Mile is experiencing in terms of comparison to challenges that we're faced.
That's a good call. Well, how about do I have a motion to appoint Barr, Gallowitz Olson, and Red Path Company as consultants for 2024?
Motion to approve that slate.
Awesome. Do I have a second?
I would second that, slate.
Okay, further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Last,
Can I comment once?
no.
Well, I want to take this moment to just say thank you. Thank you for your continued trust in Bar. You know, we obviously, you saw in the proposal, we've been with you since the beginning,
Mhm.
and we really value that relationship. And I think we're doing great things together and look forward to the future. So thank you again. And if it's any reassurance, we do have a very national presence. We just didn't put it in the proposal.
Oh, you didn't? Man, you
Yeah.
should have just peppered that in.
Yeah. Yeah, but I'd be happy to make a presentation sometime on the breadth of services if you'd like that, but thank you.
I will recognize that I did not realize that you had a big national presence. That is my mistake. I
No,
apologize.
that's all right.
Official designations. This is where we get to pick our bank and the local paper that we publish in, which is per the current legal standards. It doesn't mean it's the only place we publish, just to be very.
Yeah, I mean, we
It's the official.
use our website and
Yes.
other means as well. I mean, a number of years ago, we used to publish in all the local papers, and now there just aren't local papers. So we made the switch to Pioneer Press because it does cover our full watershed district areas.
Awesome. Could I have a motion to approve the 4M funds with LNC US Bank as our official bank of deposit and the St. Paul Pioneer Press as our official newspaper for 2024?
I would move that we approve the continued use of the foreign funds, is it? Bank as our financial institution, and also the Pioneer Press as our official noticing source.
Awesome. Do I have a second?
Second the motion.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Nice. That was the big one. Okay. Roseville Homes Phase 2 bid award.
Yeah, so you saw last month the plans and cost estimate and request to go out for bid for Roosevelt Homes. Stephanie, super quick background, and obviously you can give you more if you need it, but we constructed one new basin and enlarged an existing basin at the Roosevelt Homes complex, which is adjacent to and across from East Side Boys and Girls Club. All for the sake of, flood risk reduction. The basins went in late in the season and we decided to separate the planting from that. So this bid would be this contract would be to plant those 2 basins as well as plant a existing hillside that they have. That's all turf grass now, and they mow it and it's super steep and dangerous. And so that would take care of that as well. So we were pretty excited to get the 6 bids that we have. For this one, since it was a smaller dollar amount, we were able to kind of, give this to a handful of contractors that we work with on these types of projects. So we're excited to have just about all of them send in a bid. You can see M&L is the low bid at just over 57,000. We're still under that, or under that engineer's estimate, which is great to see. And we've worked with M&L on many different, maintenance projects and planting projects. So we're excited to work with them again.
In addition to the vegetation warranty extending a year, is the contract inclusive of an irrigation plan?
Yes, so they will be watering, yes, whether it's, Roosevelt Homes has said they have, they'll work with us on that, but it is in the contract for the contractors.
Perfect, thank you.
So it's our role to pick the lowest, most, there's a word for it, responsible.
Yes, so you'll see, I have that a board recommendation or action requested there.
Mhm.
To approve or accept the bids.
So do I have a motion to accept the bids and award the 2024 Target Retrofit Roseville Home Phase 2 project to M&L and direct staff to prepare and mail the notice of award and prepare the agreements and review the required submittals? You can say just so moved. You don't want to repeat it. Awesome. Do I have a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Moving forward to the Woodbury Target Bid Award, and I think that is printed out for us.
Yes, we should all have a handout, with that memo and details. So this is for constructing two basins at the Woodbury Target store. Yeah, so we put this out for bid, for that to go out last month as well. And you can see here, we had a record-breaking 18 bids submitted. So this went through the formal bid procedure, given the dollar amount, so we had a public bid opening. And Corilla Contracting was the low bid at 600, just over 602,000, which was again under the engineer's estimate. Actually, a number of them were, which was great to see. Yeah, so we, have done some requesting of information from Corilla. We're still doing some reference checks. So I have asked for a contingent approval from the board for that, so we can continue those reference checks and just make sure that there's nothing outstanding before we award the contract to them.
Paige, with a contingent approval, does that imply after you do your due diligence, you can complete the work that you're doing, that the staff would just?
Yeah, I mean, we'd still have the contract for you to sign, the
Yeah.
signature page, but we would, the direct staff to prepare and mail the notice of award, all that would come
Okay.
after the staff confirms that these conditions were met.
Well, just add, we have not worked with Gorilla before, nor has anybody at Bar been familiar. We usually send out an email and say, anybody worked with this firm, heard of them and things like that. And so they are relatively new in our world. We ask for references right away. We ask for the equipment they'll be using, subcontractors they have planned, past experience on similar projects, all that stuff, just because it helps familiarize us with what they can do and if they can perform the work as we have intended through the plans and specs. So that time frame usually isn't a problem. We do the bid opening and we have all of that because we're usually familiar with how things are made. We can come right to the board and say, we're confident, let's move forward. But we give them 5 business days, which is tomorrow, to submit all that. And so we may be asking for a little bit more and then do the review of that. So that's why we're not, fully ready to say, yes, this is the one to move forward. But so far, so good. We have been checking as things come in.
Yeah, we don't see any major red flags, and so if there were, then we would come to the board.
Okay,
So they've been responsive so far, all the requests we've made, all the necessary things that have been a part of the bidding requirements, they've submitted those, so.
Okay. Any further questions?
Motion that the board accept the bids and award the 2024 targeted retrofit Woodbury Target project to Corilla Contracting. Direct staff to prepare and mail the notice of award and prepare the agreements and review the required submittals.
In the conditional approval.
And a conditional
Yeah.
approval.
Yeah.
Yes, I think the language.
Oh, is there updated language?
Well, in the memo, it says contingent upon bar and district staff satisfaction with the qualification evidence provided by the parent. It's in italics. Second page. Next time the third page.
Try again.
Contingent upon bar and district staff satisfaction with the qualification evidence provided by the apparent lowest responsible and responsive bidder, Corilla Contracting, award the project to Carrilla Contracting at the bid price of $602,645.75 and direct staff to request the required bonds and insurance information and execute the contract for work.
Do I have a second?
I'll second the motion. Can I add a question?
Yes, oh, further discussion. After.
Yes, really. So I presume that that with the additional vetting that Bar and staff would do, that will be brought back to just confirm that your findings. Sure.
We'll definitely update this.
Yeah. Yep. Second.
Perfect. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
18. Did we put that publication somewhere unique?
That's definitely the most I've ever seen in my many years of doing this. Yeah, it's incredible. Lots of interest.
Happy with lots of interest. That's a good thing.
Yep.
How many of them are things that we've worked with?
I recognized a good number of them.
The second low is not a familiar name to us either. But you see Minnesota Native Landscapes in the number 3 position. Shoreline, we have Sunram, Bituminous Roadways. No, not as familiar with Minnesota Dirt Works, but I've heard of them. You know, Blackstone. We worked with Pembroke 1 year, 2 years ago. Minger, Miller, Peterson. We see New Look. I don't know if we've ever worked with them, but they've been on a lot of our projects and urban companies as well. So many familiar names in the list, just a couple that we have.
May I ask for clarification? When you say the lowest 3, we have no previous civil construction experience with them. In this particular case, what does, M&L is familiar as a name, but what separates out the civil construction?
So the civil work would be, of course, the dirt work, digging the pipe work. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
What
I'm
the
just
civil
wondering.
work is?
So we don't have any experience with M&L doing that?
So
Not
they
on
would
our
do some
projects.
Oh,
basic grading of areas,
And
but
planning.
not excavation and, you know, installing pipes and things like that. So they're more of a expanded landscaping firm. So I would say.
Okay. Let's move on to item 9, attorney report. Lauren. After you.
Yes, hi. First of all, I want to thank you for accepting our proposal. I believe Galitz Olson has also been with Ramsey-Washington Watershed since it started. So I appreciate that continued relationship. We really, we find it a privilege to be connected with this district. It really does phenomenal things. So thank you for appointing us again tonight. And I will say that every board we work with, as new people come on and shift positions, that's a unique board every time. And if you ever want different services or more explanation or less explanation or have questions about our contract documents or anything like that, just let us know. We really want our services to be tailored to this specific board and what you guys want from us. This month, I reviewed the board governance documents, and like Tina said, some things we could modernize and some things 103D just says you need to tell people 8 days ahead of time by mail if you want to call a manager called meeting. So we still deal with a lot of archaic things, even as we are able to integrate some technology. I'd say a lot of the questions that I usually get these days are about joining board meetings by Zoom and virtual attendance. So if you ever have questions, specifically Stephanie or some of the newer managers on how that works, you can ask me. Yeah, and I think that's all that I had for tonight. Thank you again.
Thank you, Lauren. Any questions for Lauren? Okay, we're
Now,
gonna,
can we step back? Sorry, we forgot to do
oh,
the
we forgot the minutes. Thank
Yeah.
you. I even wrote it down as 8.
Page cut.
Thank you, Paige. Do you want to just quickly describe the change?
Yeah, so, in the minutes, I go all the way back to minutes, on page 5 of the minutes, the second to last paragraph starts out, Tyler Olson stated that the locations being discussed, that's the paragraph. Tyler and Brandon, when they read the minutes, they said, actually, that's not quite right, so that paragraph, I can just speak it, the change, is that okay? So the change would be, Tyler Olson explained that the objective of flood risk reduction projects is to reduce the 100-year floodplain elevation below the lowest ground elevation adjacent to existing habitable structures, not to achieve a 2 feet of freeboard during the 100-year event. Flood risk reduction projects proposed will also provide improvements for more frequent events. So that was the intent of that part of the presentation. So we'll make sure we get that
So then,
corrected in the minutes.
okay,
So when you approve the minutes, then I would make that change before they go final onto the.
so then we would say, do I have a motion to approve the minutes with the proposed updates?
Yes, yep, that's correct.
Right, do I,
I would motion to approve, pending the updates.
awesome, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you very much. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you for the catch, Paige. Let's just repeat the attorney report after that. So, board topics, actually, I'm gonna just check to see, is anybody's board topics, Stephanie, is really items that, as we discuss as a board, what we want to bring forward and maybe just have a conversation. It could be anything from, I saw something on this area, this lake, that probably we should just talk about it, to I want to see a potential change in, for example, the governance manual. That's what it's for. Ultimately, we ask for, if you have ideas, that if you have seating ideas prior to the meeting, obviously ping Tina and we can add it to the agenda. For now, I don't really have a lot. I think I said what I was hoping for in the CAC meeting, where it's like, did the boots on the ground? We're getting some interesting, some good feedback, some positive feedback on what we do, and then some feedback that says we don't know who you are, what you do. And so CAC is our first line of defense there, and that's really what I was hoping to talk about. But I've already said all that. Any other comments or discussion topics for today?
I was planning to bring this up in our discussion later on regarding some of the chloride reduction parts of the manual, not part of the packet, rather. But Tina and I exchanged some emails. I saw what I thought was a fantastic presentation here a couple months ago, done by Bolton and Mink. I think many of us, or some of you may be aware, they are the folks that do a lot of the SALT symposium and training around the metro, and they're kind of stepping back and taking a little different look, and thinking that the trainings that they've done to minimize salting are great, but it's the more they can do. And so they've kind of moved into the role of thinking about designs. And so I saw a presentation that they gave on that type of topic, and I just thought it was really interesting, and trying to move the pebble just a little further up the hill. I'm thinking about the way that designs for parking lots or buildings or whatever, planning for sun angles, slopes, how that would affect not only water, but the potential for reduced icers. And so I thought that it's a worthy topic to be aware of. I think you mentioned that.
Can you send it out? I'm
So,
interested.
so Connie Fortin from Bolton Mink did a presentation at the last Metro Watersheds meeting
Okay,
in January,
yeah,
and
yeah.
that was recorded because it was a Zoom meeting. So I can send you a link to that recording, so you could watch that presentation. It was very, well done. I think, for example, one of the so they call it low salt design for developments. And one of the things that they were saying, for instance, don't put a storm drain by the handicap spots, because those spots are more heavily salted and then it's going right to the drain. So those kinds of just thinking about how the water flows for salt use, and into where it's going. So, yeah, it's some really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see it, because you're teeing off of the new technology proposal that was written in the book. Yeah. Please. That sounds
There's
great.
also, I was just at the legislative event for Minnesota Watersheds, today, and there was a lot of discussion around the limited liability legislation, and there's some more movement on that, so there's some good news on that. But there was a lot of discussion too around, watersheds and what they can do, and there's discussion around rules and this low salt design, and potentially writing them into rules, requiring salt management plans as part of our rules as well. So, there were some really good topics that I think we'll be following up on.
I'd love to read more about it. And I apologize just to tee off of that one, dude. I know we did a PFAS presentation a little earlier. Is there gonna be a way we can also get a revamp of that sometime this year, do you think?
Yeah. An update.
Yeah.
There was, we were waiting for some new guidelines, and
Yeah,
I think some of that is.
I thought it was coming out this year just for day job stuff. No, great suggestion.
Connie gave that same presentation at the watershed conference this past winter, and I attended that. It was a very good presentation, the way they're thinking of some things. I mean, it would require, I think, a look at the rules on some of the items, such as the snow gardens. I mean, but those caught my eye, a place where you're actually storing that salt laden snow and water. It obviously would not be the same type of vegetation that we typically see, but a lot of good stuff.
Have we done, I know we have in my tenure, I just can't recall when, so forgive me, but have we done a focused effort on chloride? Or presentation on what some of these things are, out of curiosity?
I mean, I know we have, I don't remember what's come to the board off the top of my head, but,
I think sending out the presentation, and I apologize that I missed it, but yeah, I'd love to see it, and then maybe we can revisit it, see if
Yeah.
there's something that we want to
I'll
talk
put it
about.
on the action line for discussion.
Yeah.
Topics.
Another thing I'd like to bring up, I don't know if Tina, if you or any from the watershed attended, but the Met Council is now looking at groundwater from a regional perspective and planning around that. I don't know, I know we typically have not gotten into that world, but I think it's an important topic to at least be aware of, since that planning is starting to happen at a regional level. I don't know what that means for us as a board or rules or anything, but just something that's coming down, so.
Yeah, I think that'll be, will definitely be one of the discussion topics as we go through the watershed management plan update. It always is. We have a groundwater, goal in our plan, but we're always talking about what our role is. So I think that will be one of the topics. And I can tie in the next.
Just a quick interject. Sorry, I'm kind of coming out of nowhere here, but I don't know how much you all know about the kind of focused chloride monitoring effort that's been done for the district. The Eric Cordy has been doing. It shows up in the annual reports, but we've been identifying hot spots in the district. Just want to make sure everybody's aware of that pretty large data set out there.
And Eric, I think, will be here next month to do the water monitoring report.
Yeah.
So we can ask him to touch on that as well.
That would be great.
Thanks, Steve.
Great topics, great ads. And then the action log, that'd be awesome. Thank you. So let's go to new reports and presentations. I think Keith was just trying to prime the pump
Yeah.
for his dissertation. Let's go.
All right.
Quick intro, Keith. So Keith, many of you who are more recent to the board probably haven't met Keith. Keith has worked with the district for many, many years, worked closely with Bill Bartogian when he was on staff here. Keith, what, 27, 28 years of experience. He's a PhD water quality scientist, chemist, expertise in aquatic lake management, aquatic toxicity, nutrient management, water quality modeling, and things like that. And so he's got a great resume, a great background, and I think if you look at our proposal again, he's one of our core team members who's been with the district for many years. So with that, I'll let Keith take it from here.
Yeah, actually, I did my PhD research here in the district 25 years ago. So I'll share. I don't know how this goes here. Do I first share my screen here and then do my presentation? Okay. Sorry, I'm a Zoom, not a Zoom guy. All right.
Was here in Minneapolis for many years, but now he resides in the state of New York. So that's where he's coming from.
Okay. Can you see my screen here?
Yes, we can.
Everybody good?
All
right, I'm gonna go into presentation mode here. To get to the beginning of the presentation. So this is, I'm talking about 2 different studies.
Wait, hold on a sec.
Can you swap your display settings? We're seeing your presentation mode.
Display settings.
Yeah, if you click that, it's going to be swap, and then you'll be good.
Okay.
Yep.
How is that?
Perfect.
Okay. I can't see any of you reacting, so just yell at me if you have questions. Anyhow, so I'm talking tonight about 2 different studies. One is about shallow lake aeration and internal loading, and the other study is an assessment of water quality changes in Coleman Lake and the potential role of aquatic plants and aquatic plant management in Coleman Lake. So these are some pretty heavy topics. There's a lot of science involved, and they fit together quite well. So I have about 6 or 7 slides to start out with to give you a background in some basic limnology, things that are associated with internal phosphorus loading in lakes. You all know this story, right? We've talked about it a million times. Stormwater runoff is a big source of nutrient loading to lakes. So that's a major part of what Ramsey-Washington does is stormwater management and treatment. Another part we may talk a little bit less about is what's going on internally in lakes. And this graphic right here shows a pipe coming into a lake and the dispersal of nutrients. When these nutrients get into a lake, they essentially settle to the bottom, and they're re-released eventually as what's called internal loading. So a big repository of the nutrients they wash off the land are these lake bottom sediments, and under certain conditions, it releases into the lake. And so oftentimes when we see late summer algal blooms, that is the source of those late summer or midsummer algal blooms. On the right here is sediment from the bottom of the lake being collected in a sediment core. You probably can't see it, but there's like a plastic polycarbonate tube there, and you drop it to the bottom of your lake, and that's the sediment in the bottom. And the role that this sediment plays in lake water quality across the district is very important. The concentrations of phosphorus and what kind of chemical conditions the lake applies to that sediment. So I have a couple slides here discussing more about this, but I want to get at why this is important. So in order for this internal load process that I talked about to occur, there needs to be 2 things, essentially. Low oxygen in the bottom sediments. So not necessarily in the water column, but within the sediments themselves, right, there has to be low oxygen. The water column in the lake is a reflection of what's going on in those sediments, but really the conditions in those sediments have to change such that there's low oxygen that triggers this internal loading. Secondly, you have to have high phosphorus. For a lot of phosphorus to come out, you have to have high phosphorus, and the amount that comes out is proportionate to how much is in the bottom of the lake sediments. And largely, there are two solutions to it. I'm talking about two of these tonight. Two solutions to internal loading in lakes is to increase the oxygen within the water column and try to drive the oxygen into the lake sediments and prevent internal loading. The other approach is to try to reduce the phosphorus in the lake bottom sediments by essentially sequestering it. Like Brad and I talked about this earlier today, it's not really reducing the phosphorus, but it's kind of binding it up so it can't release. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that process and also the oxygen process. And if you have any questions, please feel free to jump in, because I can't necessarily see how you guys are all reacting to this. So when I'm talking about low dissolved oxygen, a real good indicator of whether or not the sediments are going anaerobic or low oxygen, I'm entering just another term, apologize, is the water column concentration. You can see this graph here shows dissolved oxygen in the water column of Jervis Mill Pond, which is one of our study lakes. And it's high in the spring when the water is warm. And then as the water warms up and the bacterial activity in the sediment starts to increase, it starts pulling out oxygen from the water column into the sediments. And in Jervis Mill Pond, it's one of those situations where there's such a demand for that oxygen in the sediments that the water column just cannot recover. It has very low oxygen. This is the reason why Bill Bartosi decided to put aerators in Jervis Mill Pond to prevent winter fish kill of fish. I'm going to just do a little bit of chemistry. And it's important because a lot of people talk about internal loading, but they don't know exactly what that process really is. So essentially, internal loading in the sediments, when I'm talking about internal loading, these are all these processes that are going on within the sediment. It's essentially just bacteria decomposition and it's respiration. And as part of that respiration process, they actually are kind of making excess electrons. And those electrons, when they hit iron phosphate, it actually causes it to break apart. You have iron now, and you have phosphorus. And so once that happens, the phosphorus is soluble and can move up into the water column and cause internal loading. So here's a simulation I developed to try to help understand that process. It's the sediment core that I took a while ago, and on the left side of this graph of this image, and on the right side is my depiction of that sediment core. So it's supposed to be the same thing what's going on. In the spring, as you saw in that previous graph, oxygen is high, and as that oxygen starts to decrease, what happens is the zone where there's still a lot of oxygen in the sediment core begins to decrease. And so that line that I showed is that oxygenated zone starts to become consumed, and it moves upward and moves upward. And as it moves upward, phosphorus actually, as you can see, I'm going to do that again, it starts to come off the particles and into what's called the pore water, right? And when it gets into pore water, it eventually goes up into the lake water column. This is the internal loading process that I was talking about earlier. This may seem kind of silly, like I've got a lot of water in here and very few particles, but the truth is this sediment core on the left here is 90% water. It's only 10% solids. And that's pretty typical of Minnesota lakes, that it's a lot of water and very little solids. But the idea is if you're going to prevent internal loading, you need to keep those phosphorus particles stuck to the solid phase.
Heath,
Yeah.
quick question. So we do see differences in the consolidation or type of sediments in our lakes, and can that have an effect on internal loading? So more mucky
Consolidation
versus more solid.
Yeah, the way I have found, yes. So if you have a more dense, say, sediment, you're going to have more phosphorus per unit volume, right? And so that is a higher concentration, and that can increase your internal loading. So my analysis is always based upon the mass of phosphorus in the sediment. If it's more dense, you're going to have more phosphorus in the sediment. It can be quite deceiving though, like different types of sediments can have the capacity to hold more phosphorus. If you have more iron in your sediment, it'll hold more phosphorus actually. So the composition also has a very big role. So it's not as simple as just the density or the concentration of solids. And there's actually a very nice equation that I developed for Ramsey-Washington. It shows if you have more iron, you'll have more phosphorus, you'll have more internal loading. So it has a lot to do with the chemistry as well.
Thank you.
Yep. I mentioned aeration and I mentioned alum treatment. And alum treatment is simply a chemical mixture of aluminum sulfate. And you can see this is a treatment barge right here that shows the process by which you might add the alum to the lake surface and have the alum then settle to the bottom of the lake and begin to interact with the iron. I guess I lied. I have one more bit of chemistry. I mentioned this, that the phosphorus is stuck to iron. I mentioned that a couple of times, right? And when it becomes really low, this iron phosphate complex breaks apart. The phosphate goes in the water into the pore water of the sediment, and then eventually goes up into the water column. One way to stop this from happening is to simply get aluminum to stick to phosphorus rather than iron. And fortunately, aluminum phosphate would rather stick to aluminum than iron. So if you add aluminum to the bottom of the lake, it preferentially sticks to phosphorus. And the nice thing about aluminum is it's not subject to the same problem that iron does. If oxygen gets really low in the sediments, it stays stuck to the particles. So it doesn't go into the pore water space up in the water column. So it has a process like this. It simply kicks off the iron and creates this aluminum phosphate complex in the bottom of the lake. And so we're not getting rid of the phosphate. We're just changing what it's stuck to. We're sticking it to something that's essentially inert. And then just to, sorry, I may be overdoing this, but so essentially what it is you're adding aluminum to the surface of the sediment. It mixes in, and as it mixes in, it creates this aluminum phosphate complex. And so as that same process I mentioned before, where the oxygen begins to become depleted as the season goes on, anything not touching aluminum or having been react to aluminum, the iron phosphate will release. But when the iron or the phosphate is stuck to aluminum, it's going to stay remaining in the solid phase, and it's not going to get up into the water column. Okay, so now that I've gone over that base load of information, I want to talk to you about the shallow lake investigation. So this is about aerating shallow lakes to try to prevent internal loading. The origin of this study essentially was Bill Bartoggi, Paul's predecessor, was adding aerators to shallow lakes with the intent of keeping a hole open or a ice-free section open in the lakes to prevent winter fish kill, and in that process to manage carp in the district. I had just completed a study of a number of lakes in the district, and I noticed somewhat empirically that when these lakes mixed, internal loading was being prevented. So I noticed that these shallow lake systems are stratifying and destratifying all the time. And when they become destratified consistently, they were shutting down the internal load process. And so we devised a study to answer the question, can we use this existing infrastructure of the carp management to study whether or not aeration can prevent internal load in district lakes? So we took advantage of some kind of cost savings to kind of piggyback on what Bill was doing. These are the study lakes, Bennett Lake and Jervis Mill Pond. Bennett Lake is approximately 30-acre size lake. It's not huge, but it's nice size. You can see in this I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but you can see the aerators are located over here in this kind of corner of the lake. And for Jervis Mill Pond, they're in this northern lobe and not in the southern lobe. And so you can see this not covering the entire lake. This side of the lake was considered to be our control side, and this is our experimental side of the lake. And this is also our experimental side and then our control side as well.
Hey, Keith.
So we had, was there a question?
So, yeah, this is Val. There in that report, there was an implication that that control side didn't really truly stay controlled the whole time, that there were some interactions between. Are you going to go into some of that? I don't even know what the hypothesis would be if you expected more separation than you saw.
I was hoping more separation. You know, what I was hoping there could be perfect separation, but there's not going to be in these shallow lakes or any lake of this kind of size. There's a lot more mixing laterally across lakes than you may imagine. You kind of look at lakes and think they're just this static thing, but even very large lakes have mixing. I still think we got some good information, but obviously it's not perfect. The Jervis Mill Pond is more separated, but even there was some exchange in the Jervis Mill Pond north and south lobes. But I think there was enough separation to get some information out of the study. But they are mixing, clearly. And this next graph might kind of show you a little bit about the degree that they're mixing or not mixing. I had three goals for the study. One was simply, can we use a very simple technology, which is called forced air aeration, simply using atmospheric air, pumping into the bottom of the lake, having these bubble diffusers, and then mix the water column. This is not like a commonly done thing, because I think that the preconceived notion is that most shallow lakes are constantly mixing. They don't need aeration. They don't have the same problems that deep lakes do. So my first goal was simply to determine whether or not this simple technology can increase the oxygen throughout the water column. And the second question was, is internal loading reduced significantly, and is water quality improved? So we, in 2022, we turned on the aerator, and this is just right after we turned it on. And you can see in the right side of this figure where the aeration bar is over in Bennett Lake, that the dissolved oxygen concentrations throughout the water column were not super high, but they're more elevated than they would be without aeration. So on the West Bay, which is the control site, you can see the concentrations towards the bottom are lower. And I'm just going to go a little slower through these graphs after I gave those conclusions. So these graphs are, this is the surface of the lake, this is the lake bottom, oxygen concentrations on the x-axis, and the depth in the lake on the y-axis. And as you might imagine, at the surface, it's able to contact the atmosphere and aerate. And on the bottom, essentially you have sediment down here that I mentioned before, are the big driver of pulling the oxygen out of the water column. By mixing the water column, you're pulling that bottom water that's low and deficient in oxygen up to the surface, giving it a chance to get a breath of air at the surface of the lake, and then it gets mixed around again as the aerator is bubbling them. I had a video of what one of these bubbler systems look like, and I'm going to show you at the end of the presentation. The risk, I'm just going to screw everything up right now, but I'll show you that video at the end so you get a better feel for what these bubblers look like. So here's question number 2 I was trying to answer was, does it prevent internal loading? This is a really tricky question to answer for shallow lakes, because there's no obvious signature very often at the bottom of a lake that there's internal loading going on. So what we opted to do is actually collect sediment from the bottom of the lake, and we put it in this bag, and we actually then sucked out the pore water out of the sediment, and then directly analyzed that pore water for phosphorus and iron. And so we did this each month throughout the open water season to see if that phosphorus concentration increased over time for our control and our aerated sites to see if there's a difference. So when remember I showed you that simulation where as oxygen becomes depleted in the sediment, the phosphorus comes off and it first goes into pore water. So this would be a direct measurement of that process that I mentioned. And I should point out, this is a little bit experimental. This has never really been done to analyze internal loading. I devised this because I want to make sure we got a very direct evidence of whether or not these aerators were helping or not. Stormwater events pushing through lakes can confuse whether or not aerators have worked or not. So I wanted to get that direct measurement. And so here's that system that we used. So this is total phosphorus concentrations in Bennett Lake. It's a graph of that over time. The red line demarcates before and after the aerators were turned on. On the left side is before the aerators were turned on. On the right side, it was after the aerators had been turned on. And so this is that pore water phosphorus in the sediment over time. I'm going to start out over here. Ignore this data for the moment. Halfway through here, May 23rd. So internal loading is a process that happens after ice comes off, the lakes warm up, the oxygen becomes depleted, and then throughout the summer, it should march upwards. So what you see here in the West Bay, which is the control site, no aerators, is that the phosphorus concentration marches upward over time. And that's exactly what you would expect to see with a system that has internal loading. It builds up in the pore water, and then it also moves off into the water column. So you can see that the blue is the East Bay pore water, and the phosphorus concentrations didn't have that same clear pattern of release or increase in the pore water, suggesting that the aerator was holding down the phosphorus from being diffused into the pore water of the sediment and then off into the water column. I just want to point out here, before we had the aerator on, so here's May, June, July, blue, both of these, the east and west lobe of Bennett Lake did not have an aerator turned on, and so they both were subject to natural conditions. And you can see that the yellow started going up, the blue started marching upwards. We turned on the aerator, and the blue immediately went down and stayed down through our measurement period, whereas the yellow, which is control and no aerator, marched upwards. So it seemed like.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
This is Stephanie. Just a question. Any reason or understanding as why the yellow numbers for July 22 and July 23 are that drastically different? I mean, I don't know. Is it statistically unusual that they more than doubled?
It's a good question. For some reason, Bennett Lake was very different those 2 years. In 2022, the lake was covered with coontail. In 2023, there is not a coontail to be found in the lake. Coontail produces oxygen, and I don't know if the lack of oxygen, or potentially the lack of oxygen, had an effect. There could be some seasonal impacts that are changing, or I should say, it's not seasonal, but annual changes in climatic behavior were causing that. I should also point out, we're trying to go back to the same spot every time. So there could be some variability about where your sediment coring device simply grabs the sediment sample. There is some, sediment is not homogeneous. It can be very different where you go. So you can see that sometimes, for example, July and August, they were the same. It may have been that the phosphorus concentrations in the sediment were not really identical in those two sediment cores. That's why we took samples every month and replicated this for 2 different years to kind of avoid those effects.
Is,
There could be a lot of factors.
follow-up question, is there any inclination that, I mean, we saw mixing water, is phosphorus somehow moving from one bay to another, causing those increased levels?
So this is right in the sediment, so it's not going to be moving in this situation. So this is phosphorus in the sediment at the bottom of the lake. It's pretty much stuck there. Another thing that could be going on is, I'm going to go back a couple of things here. Another thing that might be going on is this fountain that was going off and on during our study. It could be causing some confounding effects. We didn't really have control. Sometimes it was off, sometimes it was on, and it was breaking down. So it could have an effect on, you know, my control site as well. That's something that Roseville was in charge in, and we didn't really have a chance to. We tried to convince them to leave it off. That wasn't really, the message wasn't really getting through.
Keith, building on that, I had a question. If, as you guys looked at the data, were there any other things that were done? For example, any spraying that was done for any of the aquatic vegetation?
I don't know. I don't know if there was or not. Not that I know of. I'm not sure if
Because they don't have to get a permit through us to do
No,
that.
no.
They can do it per lot or like a certain area.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be a whole lake treatment, and I don't think they haven't managed the aquatic plants like that in the past, so I'd
Yeah.
be surprised if the city did that.
One, is there a secondary effect where we oxygenated and all of a sudden that did impact the plant life, out of curiosity?
Yeah, I hope not. I don't know. I don't, you know, those are kind of things that are, I don't think so, but I don't know. You know, I can't really conclusively say that. We've had some really strange years the last couple of years that have been excessively hot and dry, and so aquatic plants do have, you know, are susceptible to extremely high temperatures. They don't necessarily do very well with that. So it's something, it's a little bit of a mystery of what was going on there.
And you only did one pour water site, is that correct? Or is that an average of a couple of sites?
No, it's one site. We took one location and took, we may have taken 2 cores to get enough sample, but I think it was definitely one location. We tried to stay within kind of a box zone, so we didn't replicate it in the same location. We tried to stay within a zone, but it was one sample.
How deep are the cores, Keith?
How deep?
How deep?
The cores were taken were about 15 centimeters to 20 centimeters of sediment, but we only took the top 6 centimeters of sediment and extracted that. So that's the zone where internal loading is occurring and has a chance to move into the water column. So it's not a huge, the active layer is typically not very huge. And as I'll talk about the Coleman Lake data, I can point out to you, you know, when we do these alum treatments, if the alum does subside below, you know, 6 or 8 centimeters, it's not really being very effective anymore. So that zone, it's a really small zone, is actually where most activity is. Keep on interrupting me if you have any questions. Just let me know. Just jump in. We also measured iron. So as I mentioned to you previously, the internal load process, the iron phosphate bond breaks apart and both become soluble. And you can see this is iron in the pore water in the bottom sediments. And you can see if you could start here and say May 23rd, it goes upwards and it corresponds to the phosphorus. And you can also see quite dramatically here where, where you have this blue line, and where the aerator is, and it was marching upwards, and the aerator went on, and it dropped.
I assume that's total iron?
That is total iron, but it went through something called a pour water sipper. So it does, it is kind of semi-dissolved, it's gone through a filter. It's a fairly porous filter, but it still is a filter. So it's not like, it's not going to be clays. It's not going to be particulate from a clay. So it's going to be largely dissolved, operationally defined. And so here's Jervis Mill Pond, and what you'll notice is the phosphorus concentrations in the Jervis Mill Pond pour water is a lot higher. This is a super, what's called anaerobic system, where the sediment oxygen demand, the amount of oxygen the sediment needs, is really high, and the phosphorus concentrations get very high in the pour water. They do also in the water column of Jervis Mill Pond. And so before we installed the aerator, or Bill installed the aerator, I should say, we have the North Bay. You can see the concentrations are marching up really high in the pour water. And also in the South Bay, they're following that kind of typical internal load pattern. When we turn the aerator on in the North Bay, the concentrations in the North Bay pour water didn't necessarily march upward, but they're still really high. And then the South Bay, you can see they're somewhat comparable. It had that same pattern. So this is a situation where this system, the oxygen demand is just so high that these aerators, even though there's a lot of aerators in a very small area, just could not satisfy that and couldn't really prevent internal loading to a large degree. It stopped a little bit marginally, but not really very much. Like if you did the alum treatment, the phosphorus concentrations would be very, very low in the pour water.
Keith, would that suggest that we needed more aerators, or that the aeration wasn't good for this particular sediment loading?
Exactly. So the second part of your comment, you could put a 1,000 aerators in here with forced air aeration, it wouldn't matter. You only can force so much air into water, right? It has limits of solubility. Yeah. And that's the problem, right? You can't force the oxygen to diffuse super fast into the sediments, right? It has a limitation of a rate that has to diffuse into the sediments. So this technology, or this methodology, may not be the right methodology for something like Jervis Mill Pond. If you really want to reduce internal loading, you may need to use an aeration system that uses direct oxygen injection, where it actually adds direct oxygen in very fine bubbles that then supersaturate the water column with oxygen, which then can force oxygen to the sediment to satisfy the sediment oxygen demand.
Keith, and I appreciate the learning objectives. What I'm curious about is what kind of mental mark or benchmark did you think was going to be a meaningful change in these two situations? Like I look at the Bennett Lake Pond, and you could see, when I was first looking at it, it's like, oh, there's like a 50% decrease sometimes, but I can't really tell because it's not a trend. I don't know if it's a meaningful change. And then it's way different with Gervais. And it's very, not Gervais, forgive me. Thank you. Jarvis Mill Pond. So it's very hard to understand, is the relative change an important change or meaningful change in both situations in my simplistic view.
You have it right on. You're totally right on. So my goal was to, number one, is there a change? And then so we're monitoring, now this is a phosphorus in the water column. Is this change in the sediments that we're seeing occurring? And we said, yeah, it seemed like aerators are, in some situations, reducing that pour water phosphorus, damping down internal load. But the reality is it enough to make a difference? And so we measured total phosphorus. I should say Eric measured total phosphorus in the water column for this study, and probably Lindsay and probably Kyle. And you can see that the total phosphorus concentrations are really high. So it's not like the Bennett East, all of a sudden the phosphorus concentrations crash downward. They're very high in this year and not below state standards. I'm going to skip by this and come back to it. Same with Jervis Mill Pond. You can see that in 2013 when aeration was on. Here's the North Bay. The concentrations are still really high. South Bay concentrations are still very high. So getting back to your concept, no, there's not a meaningful change with these approaches that for the forced air mixing type approach. Something I didn't expect is chlorophyll A concentrations in the water column, say in Bennett, and also Jervis Mill Pond, seem to be lower in the East Bay compared to the West Bay, which didn't have the aerator on. And same with for Jervis Mill Pond. It seemed like the North Bay concentrations of chlorophyll A were lower all through the year compared to the South Bay. And then going back to 2022 to double check to see if I'm not seeing something that's imaginary, you can see the chlorophyll A concentrations between the two bays were largely similar, except for this July where the South Bay was higher than North.
You would expect that this would move similarly to the phosphorus measure. Is that a correct? I think that was written in the assumption.
Right.
The phosphorus are linked in the cycle, so you'd expect these to respond in kind.
I would. I think what's happening here is the mixing of the water column is forcing phytoplankton down underneath the photic zone and making it harder for them to get light. And so it's kind of obstructing photosynthesis and growth of phytoplankton a little bit. Is this a significant event result? It's an observation. It's not going to prevent huge algal blooms to occur. It's just something to note that it did have this effect. So I'm definitely not promoting aeration as part of this work. I'm actually doing a study in northern Vermont where there was a massive aeration system put in and it totally didn't work. So the question we're trying to answer here is just something that could be, can we see if there's any benefits to using aeration or expanding this use of aeration in concert with existing activities? So that was kind of the intent of this. So I think my conclusions, I think I have some conclusions here. The forced aeration systems can reduce internal phosphorus loading for certain lake systems. We saw for Bennett, it did. And for Jervis Mill Pond, not very much. And clearly, using forced air aeration probably is not going to be enough to meet Minnesota eutrophication standards. For other systems, I think, such as Jervis Mill Pond and potentially other lakes in the district, such as Wakefield Lake, direct oxygen injection may be an approach to consider. And I have some reasons why I still don't want necessarily give up on aeration per se. The idea of oxygenating the lake sediments, it's an alternative to using alum, and some people are not, have concerns about aluminum simply adding chemicals to the environment, So this is an alternative to that. Systems, for example, like Wakefield Lake, where you have a fairly good sediment load coming in with a very large trunk sewer. If you did alum treatment, it's possible that alum treatment would be a very short lifespan because of all the loading that's already going into that very small lake from a very large system. So an aeration system doesn't really care if there's a lot of loading coming in. It simply keeps that surface layer aerated to prevent internal loading. So I think direct oxygen injection, which I've seen several lectures have been very successful in deep lakes and preventing internal loading, may be a better approach for some of these systems. I think it's a site-by-site, a site-specific type of thing as well.
This is Stephanie. Sorry, I was just wondering, going way back to your beginning illustration where you have, don't worry about going back, but it's that.
Oh, okay.
You have the storm pipe coming in and bringing in the input, nitrogen, phosphorus. My question is, how long does it take for the phosphorus to come in through the storm sewer before it gets into the sediment?
So that's a good question. So it happens all the time. So what happens is the stormwater comes into the lake, and you have dissolved and particulate phosphorus. The particulate phosphorus will settle down, but that's not really the main source of nutrients to your lake bottom. What happens is the phosphorus gets picked up by the algae. The algae grow, and then they die and they settle. So the main source of loading is those algae grabbing the phosphorus and depositing in lake bottom sediments, and they'll accumulate over time.
So like
so
a
for
growing season?
Pardon me?
So one growing season?
It's a continuous process. So it's a constant process where the phosphorus comes in, gets captured and deposited all through the summer season and through the fall. That process is always going on. Colburn Lake, which I'm talking about next, had an alum treatment in 2010, and from this work that I just will present here, it's pretty clear that it's no longer, being effective. So in about 10 years, maybe a little bit more, enough phosphorus was depositing on the lake bottom sediments to render the alum treatment no longer effective. So a 10-year period, that process occurred and restored the internal loading in the lake.
And just to add to that, Keith, this is Tina. That's why we manage both external and internal load, because that external load is, constantly coming in. We want to try and reduce that as well as deal with the legacy phosphorus that's in the internal load as well.
Do you want to cover the recommendations for the aeration before we jump forward? Do you want to cover that at the end?
Sure. These are my conclusions about what I saw. And what I saw was forced air aeration definitely improved oxygen within the water column, which is beneficial to aquatic life all on its own. But the intention of this was to try to reduce internal loading. It showed that in shallow lakes, if you do aerate them, you have the potential to reduce internal loading depending upon the system. Bennett, yes. Jervis Mill Pond, not as effective. I still think it's a reasonable approach to consider in the future for certain situations. If you have a situation where there's a lot of external load still coming in, you've controlled it as best you can, but you're still going to have enough. The situation would be Wakefield Lake, for example, and you need a situation where you can continually keep the sediments aerated and prevent internal load by doing that. And situations where alum treatment might not be effective. There's more to talk about that I haven't described. The chemistry of the sediments will also determine whether or not aeration or alum treatment will be effective. A lot of these shallow lakes have a chemistry where alum treatment will not be effective. And I think a viable approach is try to augment these sediments with iron and aeration to try to prevent internal loading. So it's another step from the intent of this study, but we can talk about that in the future. But there are some situations where you're just not going to have an effective alum treatment, and then the question is how do we deal with those type of shallow lake systems?
I'll just jump in there, Ms. Tina, again, just to say that, so like he's mentioning Wakefield and Bennett are two lakes where we have TMDLs, where we've been, targeting external load through projects and program implementation. And really internal load is our next decision, right? So that will be coming to you over, I think we have some plans for this later this year to discuss how we're going to address internal load in those two lake systems. And that's where this information and Keith's recommendations potentially moving forward, giving you options for how to best.
Can we have the slide deck just in a point, as a point of feedback? That the slide deck made reading this paper much easier. It took a lot of side research to figure out the connections between things, and just I love what he did here, and just even that little animation, if it was in the, it would have, not that you have to worry about my time, but it would have definitely saved time.
Thank you for that comment.
Yeah.
There is so much to talk about here. We could spend another hour and a half talking easily about all the the nuances of this. And we collected a lot of data, and there was a lot to go through. So I recognize that it was a pretty hefty lift.
And we'll put the slide deck on our website and send you a link so you have that.
That'd be great. Well, let's jump to the Coleman Lake. That one is.
I can ask a side question, kind of expanding upon what Stephanie said with the phosphorus coming in from, man-made systems. This may be a stupid question, building upon, some people don't like the alum treatment in the lakes. We know in an anaerobic environment, like an iron enhanced sand filter doesn't work. Have there been any studies looking at aluminum enhanced filters where you're separating that treatment away from the lake, so it's a pre-treatment?
There are iron coated aluminum media, so there are media that are at least partially aluminum based, that is being used in the 9 Mile Creek watershed district, that is being used because they were concerned about anaerobic conditions, so they're testing iron-based, aluminum-based, and just straight filter media.
And as another option, like our Tanner's alum facility, that's an injection facility that's ahead of the lake system, right? So it's not a lake application.
Yeah, and I was just curious because I know there was a project where we threw out the iron enhanced sand filter due to the type of events, and it was going to be too anaerobic. So I'm just wondering if this is something has been done, is looked at being done as a PMP. Like I said, not so much about the water quality that he's talking about, but
It'd be nice to see maybe as a separate thing how the 9 Mile's doing with it, out of curiosity. Awesome. Should we switch to Coleman?
All right. So Coleman Lake this water quality assessment, which also included some more enhanced aquatic plant surveys in Coleman Lake, and then we used to use Beaver Lake as our control lake. We had intended to do a lot of water quality modeling. That didn't quite work out, but we have a lot of really good data to discuss, and some things to discuss as well. And so I want to go over Coleman Lake. I was involved in the original alum treatment on Coleman Lake in 2010 and other things before that as well. I actually cored Coleman Lake in 1999. As part of 1999. Yes, it's part of my PhD thesis. So I've been involved in Coleman Lake for quite a long time. And I think we all know that aquatic plants have been a major feature in Coleman Lake for a long time, even before management was. A lot of management activities were committed to Coleman. Management activities, from 2008 and then through that period, have increased the coverage and abundance of aquatic plants on Coleman Lake. There was a 2008-2009 whole lake herbicide treatment design to get rid of to manage the curly pondweed. It's very successful at knocking the curly pondweed down. There was an alum treatment conducted in the spring and the fall, and then there have been a series of ongoing carp management activities, winter netting, and ongoing management of carp in the Phelan Chain of Lake, upstream in Markham Pond, Casey Lake, etc., to try to control the carp populations. And there has been a whole list of external load control measures, such as iron hand sand filter, Maplewood mole, etc., upstream to control external loads. the result of a lot of that has been that the aquatic plant population increased notably, and also the total phosphorus concentrations dropped notably. So in 2010, the alum treatment, 2008, 2009, the whole lake herbicide treatments, and then it stayed low for quite a long time. In 2018 and 2019, it started to creep up. And so we were wondering what's going on here. And then 2022 and 2023, it increased notably more. And then there are some observations that aquatic plant management had become more intense in Coleman Lake. And there was some question whether or not the increased area of the aquatic plant management had been stimulating, this response of phosphorus coming back. So there's been a lot of discussions since then. Observations we made even before, these data points came upon us. We noticed that in 2008, 2009, when we did these whole lake herbicide treatments, phosphorus concentrations did go up quite a bit. The lake populations of aquatic plants changed significantly also after those whole lake treatments, and also the alum treatment. So observing these, I think Paul's predecessor, Bill Bartologgi, is wondering, are aquatic plant management activities affecting the lake? Clearly, there's confounding information as well, right? So the alum treatment was expected the last 10 years. And so there's some question of whether or not the alum treatment also is contributing to this or solely responsible for this. So that's the impetus behind this study. So I've been reporting on Coleman Lake phosphorus concentrations and chlorophyll A, helping district here and there on different projects. In 2000, is this 18, 19, 20, we noticed that phosphorus had increased in the lake, but the chlorophyll A concentration, the phytoplankton, didn't respond very heavily to that increase in phosphorus. And we were wondering, is this going to hold? What's going to happen here? Phosphorus concentrations increased more. You can see that the chlorophyll A finally did respond, where we had a lot more phytoplankton in the lake, phytoplankton blooms, than we had previously. And that is kind of, I think, what triggered some concern that potentially the more intense herbicide treatments that were planned for those years, was responsible for that.
So we as I read through this particular one, I was curious, did we do any pre-measure of phosphorus coming in on this particular lake out of curiosity? Did we look or consider changes to BMPs around Coleman Lake throughout this time as well?
You mean when the phosphorus concentrations were increasing, you mean?
Yeah, I'm looking post alum treatments, and I'm just curious if other BMPs were entered in that particular area, or if there were construction projects around Coleman that might have also contributed as noise factors.
There's definitely a lot going on. Markham Pond was drawn down and dredged in that time period. Coleman Basin was drawn down in 2023 and for maintenance and upgrades to the Coleman Basin permeable weir system. I think there's other drawdowns I may not have been involved in that Bill was doing for carp management activities. Casey Lake had significant changes during that time as well. So there were a lot of activities going on. And
this is Mark, Keith. I guess putting it a little bit different way, I think the data that you've been looking at have been focused on in lake, and specifically in sediment primarily, but I think with Coleman, you're doing some of the water column.
It's all water column for Coleman.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I think what Val was asking, and what I was curious about as well, have other data showing that those BMPs have consistent, what has been their effect of new loading to Coleman?
Right. So
alum in my mind is just a treatment and a comprehensive, right, for phosphorus management in the lake. I'm just curious about the external. as highlighted.
Yeah, so certainly we, again, when I say we, I mean Eric and Lindsay and Kyle have been doing monitoring at the inlet at Coleman Lake for a number of years. And when we do a study like this, I request that they do additional sampling. And so they may do more intensive sampling on Coleman Creek. And Bill and I, a year and a half ago, had been working on a manuscript. So we were working pretty intensively on looking at phosphorus concentrations coming into Coleman Lake. The concentrations have been decreasing. So the average annual concentrations have been decreasing. Of course, there's some variability with climatic and storm events and such. So on a concentration basis, concentrations have been declining for Coleman Lake. That doesn't mean that every year the phosphorus mass coming to Coleman Lake is dropping. It can increase in one year and drop in another, but overall it has been declining. And I have that data. If anybody wants to see that, I can pull that out. I just hadn't. The original intent of the study was to use that data, in-lake data, the aquatic plant data, the aquatic plant biomass data, and model the lake. But we unfortunately didn't have the biomass data to do that modeling, and tried to figure out, you know, how much of the phosphorus other aquatic plants picking up, and if different aquatic plant populations were present in the lake, what would happen to that concentration. So I was going to put the whole story together, but unfortunately I couldn't do that. So I'm focusing right now on some of these important in-lake processes that are of interest.
And as we look at other lakes that are treated with alum, we expect at least a 10-year. Is that what I'm understanding in terms of its ability to manage phosphorus? Or is there,
yes,
what's the expectation?
Yeah, it seems to be 10 to 15 years, can be less than that. But another lake, Bryant Lake, which was in the 9 Mile Creek watershed district, was treated in a similar time frame to Coleman, and it's also just become, you know, reverted back to its old internal loading rates. So I think it was in 2008 we treated Bryant Lake, if I remember right, and a couple of years ago we noticed that it's pretty much was done. So it's 10 to 15 years typically if you have a good treatment. 20 years kind of like max lifespan.
And I'll jump in too and add that that's one of our lake management strategies, right, is to address that external load and then go to internal load, because that reducing the external load helps the longevity of that.
Yeah.
That's
Well, I mean, but what I think I was concluding was he's saying that the external load has on trend decreased over time, yet this one has a fairly small active life for alum. It just is, it was
this has
using.
been 14 years.
But it's important to know.
Okay, oh, forgive me, yeah.
It's really important to note that external loading has not been increasing. So the trend has been decreasing. Certainly there's some noise in it. Because when you're seeing this increase of nutrient or chlorophyll, you know, phosphorus or chlorophyll over this 10-year period, that it's not due to external. It's due to internal, which is the case that you're making.
That is correct. You only see moves like this when internal loading changes in lakes. You just don't see that with stormwater type systems on an annual basis like this.
It's too dramatic of a change.
Yeah, it's pretty dramatic. You can that seemed to be often sometimes the way how treatments work, where they seem like they're working, and then you have this kind of large movement upwards.
Can you comment on, in short, why that is? Is it that the alum, the aluminum essentially gets buried over time, no longer accessible, or not the case?
Or it's like fully consumed?
Or is it that it is flushed, depending upon the hydraulic of the system?
Still there. We cored the lake. It's still there. It's deeper. It's now more like 6 or 8 centimeters. The aluminum is 6 or 8 centimeters into the sediment. So I think there's two things that happen. there's another phosphorus molecule called organic phosphorus that decays over time and contributes to the available phosphorus pool. And so I think what happens is that then builds up to a level that returns internal loading to where it was in the past. Also mixing, there's fish, aquatic invertebrates, lake activities, all sorts of stuff going on that can cause the sediment to get disturbed. And when it gets disturbed, aluminum is a flocculant, so it's the first thing to settle down. And so over time, it starts to settle down more and more into the sediment as it's just disturbed. And so it begins to kind of self-bury itself, I think, over time. Did that make sense at all, anybody? Can you visualize that, it going poof and then it coming down?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're
So-
shaking our heads, yes.
Okay. That's good to know. Any more questions about kind of this graph here? Okay.
No, I was hoping you'd jump to talk about the statistics significant graphics and scenarios.
Oh.
Just out of curiosity, what year and if you could just.
You mean in terms of the aquatic plant coverage or
Yeah,
you
yeah,
mean later?
because that seemed to be where you were drawing us to a conclusion, was that aquatic plant life and some of the treatment and management of that is driving this
Okay.
dramatic jump.
I'll get to that quickly. Just want to point out that this is a graph of pre and post management relation between total phosphorus and chlorophyll in Coleman Lake. And the blue stuff is before the management in 2010, and the X's are after. And so I just want to point out something we think is really fascinating, is the fact that when the aquatic plants kind of got very abundant in Coleman Lake, the relationship changed, meaning we could have more total phosphorus and you wouldn't get the same amount of chlorophyll anymore in the lake. And I think what was going on there is shading, other effects. So the aquatic plants tended to keep the chlorophyll lower over time. Going to Jervis Lake, same time period, you don't see that same shift. So they have a benefit, not just by, so the alum treatment and I think the expansion of the aquatic plants afterwards in concert led to the water clarity that we saw after the treatment. Here's the point. This is a graph of point intercepts that Ramsey County did in 2023. It's called a point intercept. They measure aquatic plants, each one of these points. And we took all the data we could find to compile and try to visually assess what has been happening with aquatic plants over time. I should point out this high bar here is coontail. So with the alum treatment, one thing that happened is coontail went wild. It stayed high. You can see it's been lower recently, but then you also see that curly pondweed, which is right next to coontail on this graph, has increased notably in recent years. So visually, it looks like there has been some kind of shifting going on in the population in recent years compared to the past. And I don't know exactly, why that has occurred. Here is a graph given to me by April Londo from the DNR about the number of acres that have been permitted for herbicide treatment in Coleman Lake. You can see the recent years is more acreage than in the past, except for these 2 years, it was more. So that's where this question is this increased activity affecting things or not affecting things? In terms of things, I mean, water quality in Coleman Lake. And here is the statistical analysis that we conducted. The group 2 is always 2020, 2022, and 23. These are the years where they had the increased acreage of treatment in Coleman Lake. And then we had different groupings here to try to slice and dice it after 2010 in every way you could possibly think of. 2010, 2013, and 2016 were spot treatment years, but low acreage. And you can see I focused on coontail for this analysis because coontail was abundant in Coleman Lake, has changed, and also is very important because it is known to take up phosphorus from the water column of Lake. So it's I think it's an important part of the story of why clarity in Coleman Lake changed so much after the alum treatment. So you can see that the spot treatments versus I would say higher acreage treatments, p-value of 0.1, p-value of 0.1 in the stats world is typically considered to be not significant. So these two groups are considered to be the same. A p-value of 0.05 is considered to be significant. We picked some years just before this increase in treatment acreage, compared the two in terms of coontail coverage. How many spots essentially are they covering? And it's 81% for the test group 1, 55.03, meaning there's significant difference. So there was a shift, according statistically, in 3 years before compared to 3 years after the 3 years of increased acreage of treatment. We then did a test for the whole entire period, 2010 to 2019, compared to the test group 2, higher acreage, 0.02, p-value, significantly different, suggesting that this population is significantly different from the earlier population when there was better water quality and largely less acreage of treatment. And then we compared late summer as well as early spring, so late summer surveys. And it seemed like for this test group, we had late summer surveys compared to 2022, 23, when they had higher acreage of treatment. P-value is 0.01, significantly different. So that, and then 2010 to 2017, where we had early surveys compared to the high acreage group, showing that it was not significantly different. So overall, there's according to statistical analysis, there is a difference between the populations. They have changed, right? So it's statistically, they are significantly different groups.
So we notice a change, but we don't know if it's causal.
Exactly. I would say that's exactly true. Is it because curly pondweed have come in and displaced and caused problems? Is it because the alum treatment is failing and now the lake is more turbid and that's reduced the coontail occurrence? Or is it a combination of the two? So I don't know if it's a combination of the two. I suspect it may be, but I can't make that conclusion necessarily. I can just say this population has changed. In 2023, coontail was measured a whole bunch of times across the lake, point intercept survey. I don't see that it's necessarily crashing or increasing. Seems fairly stable to me. I have a bunch of aerial images as well. I'm gonna have to get out of this presentation mode for the PowerPoint and show you that. That to me was, I think, fairly telling. I don't know, Brad, if you agree, if that's useful of showing here.
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful.
Okay.
It illustrates, I mean, just buzz through them quickly, like you did earlier today with me.
All right, let me minimize this presentation
I
here.
zoomed out and was flipping back and forth in the packet.
Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
It hasn't loaded quite yet.
Okay, let me see here.
No,
I
now
have the
can
wrong
see
thing
it.
shared. Sorry,
That's
my
okay.
bad. I'll get it. If I hang up by mistake, I'm gonna stop share and reshare here.
Yeah.
So here we go. Let me go back. These are some aerial images of Coleman Lake. I picked late summer, largely because that's where the aerial images were available.
You cannot,
It's not sharing.
not sharing now.
I just got a Zoom quit unexpectedly message.
Well, you're still here, but
I'm still here. Let me do another screen share.
Maybe just in the interest of time, do people have questions about the aerial images that they saw in the packages? Okay, oh, you got it. Good.
All right, so here's 2015, right? You see pretty good coverage. This happened to be the year that they did some aquatic plant harvesting. So you can see these strips here where there's some harvesting going on, experimental harvesting. 2015, 2016, 17, 18, 19, and then 20, when the acres of application increased, 21, 22, 23. So I don't see, there are some subtle changes, but it didn't, like, it wasn't like a notable effect in my view that I could see from the surface coverage of the aquatic plants. Doesn't mean there isn't a more subtle effect going on
this
here.
image here, what is that just an image artifact in the center of the screen?
This right here,
Yeah,
I think that's wind. I don't know
okay. Oh.
exactly how if they had multiple shots that they blended together.
I was gonna say, sometimes on
This
the
is from
iPad,
something called near map imagery.
Thanks, man.
And then last thing I'll show you. I'm gonna stop share and reshare. Let me see if I can get this right here. We did drone flyovers. Okay. Of Coleman Lake as well as Beaver Lake, which is another shallow lake, very similar to Coleman and Beaver Lake. We thought would be, all right, got a bunch of weird stuff here. Trying to get back to this. Can't seem to, oh, there we go. Here's Coleman Lake in August 2023. That's Coleman Lake. And this is Beaver Lake in surface coverage. Beaver Lake, I'm assuming you can still see it, I hope. You can see it's not significantly different from Beaver. Beaver is less than Coleman, but subsurface, there is much more coontail coverage than Coleman Lake. But all this analysis, I can't necessarily say that I've seen like a significant change in the populations that I can grab onto a really firm conclusion. Clearly, there's a water quality change going on, and clearly there's some kind of shift in the species changing. But as to why, I think what Val commented, I don't exactly know. One more time, going back to my presentation for my conclusions. Okay, so I think as part of this presentation, I think we can all agree that an abundant and diverse aquatic plant population, and one that's very stable also, is really important to achieve consistently good water quality in these shallow lake systems. We saw that in Bennett Lake as well. Like, for some reason, there was a significant change in the aquatic plant population in Bennett Lake, and the water quality changed right during the middle of my aeration study. And knowing that the aquatic plant populations are so important to maintain good water quality, it seems like effort should be focused on making sure that's maintained, that diverse native aquatic plant population. And one thing that needs to be controlled are invasive plants as part of that effort. And so management should really target the invasive aquatic plants and promote the native plants. It's clear another alum treatment is needed for Coleman Lake if you want to keep Coleman Lake off the impaired water slips, I think that is an important part of the story to keep phosphorus below 60 micrograms per liter, in addition to the ongoing watershed efforts. I think we talked about this third bullet that I have here. The populations are different now. I can't conclude that it's necessarily the result of increased herbicide application areas. Greater abundance of curly pondweed may be having an effect, and also climate. Last 2 years have been pretty weird in terms of watershed runoff and temperatures and water temperatures. So climate could be having an effect as well.
I was actually, Keith, this is Val. I was curious about if you did any statistical assessments of the climate differences similar to what you did with the density of the plants.
I didn't do a statistical assessment.
It was just more of a curiosity because we have seen definitely warmer climate trends. I was just curious.
And warmer earlier in the year that I've ever seen in terms of water temperatures.
Like, it's like more growing periods, right? For some of these, you don't have to
June.
respond to now. I was just curious that the last bullet really was a question I had.
Yeah, it's something I could bring later on if you want to get into that. I think, given the importance of Coleman Lake and the importance of aquatic plants in Coleman Lake, I recommend that we, going forward, do a really good job of measuring the changes in aquatic plant populations over time by conducting point intercept surveys on Coleman Lake and some other district lakes perhaps as controls, so we can assess how water quality and aquatic plant abundance is changing. And so to make sure we're consistent over time, I recommend doing these surveys, not just in the spring and midsummer, but if we can, monthly like we did as part of this Coleman Lake study.
I was gonna just ask a question. I mean, you said it wasn't statistically significant, and you can't for sure say that herbicides are driving the decrease of the coon tails. Is there a way to further analyze that with controls and figure out if that is relevant or not? And in relation to that, does the watershed have any recourse if it is shown that the herbicides is really driving down this plant?
I think a very telling thing will be if we do the alum treatment and we don't get back to concentrations as low as they were after the previous alum treatment, and we don't get the same effect, and we still are intensively managing aquatic plants such they don't really recover to where they were after the previous alum treatment, we may have some good evidence there as to what the effect is. So I think we won't really be able to separate that out until we do another alum treatment to see what's going on.
We should definitely. When are we going to chat about the lake next, Tina? Do you think?
About Coleman?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. As
Forward
we get in
planning.
the budget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking because there's an interval in which they're allowed to do spot treatments, right? What's the interval? They can't do it every year in terms of managing plants for herbicides. Is it every 2 years?
They can do it every.
They can do it every year. You can
year.
re-permit every year for herbicide treatments.
Yeah.
My thought is like, if we can somehow show that, is there a way to increase mechanical removal versus herbicide?
Yeah.
We don't wanna like choke off access for these homeowners, obviously, and that's a major reason we do it, as well as for recreation clarity, but I guess we don't know if it's truly.
When it seems like it'd be a difficult experiment to control. If we do the alum treatment, there's already blooms occurring currently. I would think as a homeowner, I'd want to go and clean up as you've suggested, Ben. And so.
Right, so if we're gonna move forward with an alum treatment, we would go through a management plan with the DNR that would come from us, right?
Yeah.
And then that would be done in concert with what the homeowners would be allowed to do. So there is, you know,
Good, so we
management
could
from
help
both
control some of
ends.
that.
Yeah. So I mean, when we brought up the concerns, the DNR put up some red flags, and they did have, you know, some discussions with the lakeshore owners about, you know, the treatment. They wanted, you know, more information from us, so we, you know, asked Keith to look into it. But that is a DNR process and permitting, that we don't have a lot of, say in. I would say it's their process there as far as permitting, but certainly if we're asking to manage it in a different way with another alum treatment and potential treatment of curly leaf, if that's an issue, then we're part of the story for sure.
Can we request the number of herbicide permits pulled?
Yeah, we have that information.
Yeah, because I'm not suggesting that he has to do a big statistical assessment, but I would assume you could pull, this is what it was prior, this is what it was during. And
Yeah, I
then-
think that's in there, right, Keith? That was part of your.
It is part of it.
The number of, oh, yes, it's figure 4.2. Well, then I mean, I can't see any.
Well, so that, I mean, for the concern is what is done versus what is.
Yes. Thank you. That's why it wasn't notable, because I looked at that graphic, so I can't tell anything with it. Okay. Thank you very much. This was the
My
key.
pleasure. Thank you for your patience with my lack of Zoom knowledge. I appreciate that.
I definitely wanted you to have this, you know, obviously, we've been working on these studies for a while now too, and so to have that kind of wrap up as far as what the data is showing, and then yes, management decisions moving forward will come.
Yeah.
For the next several months.
This one seems pretty pressing, but we can cover that later.
Yeah.
Let's go to item 12, administrative report.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank
Steve.
you, Kane.
Yeah, so we have my meetings attended over the last month. It's been a busy month. As well as upcoming meetings, I highlighted Waterfest just as another reminder, because that'll be right around the corner, in the Minnesota Watershed Center Tour. Paige and I have been working with Capital Region on tour stops, and it's coming together. We should have the venue. Maddie from Minnesota Watersheds is working on securing a hotel and venue for that. So looking at some downtown St. Paul locations for that. And then we'll have about half the tour in Cap Region, the tour in Ramsey-Washington. So more to come on that. I also wanted to point out the Minnesota Watersheds meeting on April 16th. That's an in-person meeting at Capital Region Watershed District. And it leads into something about the Minnesota Watersheds updates that I was going to bring from the legislative event today. The topic for conversation will be the legislative update, and there will be our new lobbyists through Minnesota Watersheds that will be presenting. So if that's of interest to you, you could mark that meeting on your calendar. I know Cap Region has hybrid, just installed some equipment to do hybrid, but I'm not sure if will be in place in time. So.
Just to be clear, we're always invited, we're always able to participate in those.
Yeah, yep. Do you all get the meeting notices for that? They come from me. So I'm hopeful that I make sure that you're on the list, and Stephanie and Shindy were added, so you'll start to see those. That's for the Metro Watersheds. That's part of our Minnesota Watershed Association for the metro area. So I just wanted to point that out as well. The action log, you'll see, I will be adding a couple of items that were brought up today to keep track of those. Just an update on the land acquisition use policy. That's something that Manager Kramer, Matt, asked me to be more involved in. So I've been in discussions with him about that. So we hope to have something to bring back to you next month, as well as an update. And because we have a new board, I do want to kind of bring back that West Vadnais boundary change and kind of give you history of that, and then where we can go for next steps on as well. Actually, Paul's shoreline condition assessment planning, I think we're gonna move to May, perhaps. We're discussing moving that to May.
I'm really excited about that. Yeah.
Yeah, but we will have a presentation from Ashley, one of our intern who did some research for her master's program on a wetland system near here. So that will come in April, but then the shoreline condition assessment will come in May. And
We still have the
Elms policy as well. So that definitely will feed into all this information that we have from Keith, and we'll bring that forward as we move into the budgeting season as well, as we think about what we might want to do for next year. So Minnesota watersheds updates. The legislative event was today. We had a administrators meeting in the morning and then a legislative briefing in the afternoon. I was very impressed with our new lobbyist, who's working in concert with Ray Bone, who is our longtime lobbyist, who's retiring. So it was really nice to hear some new language around, what the work is. One of the things about this legislative season is it's a shorter season. The second year of the biennium is a shorter legislative season, which means not as much gets done. Last year was a very busy and active session. They're not anticipating that much moving forward in this part of the biennium. So they're working heavily on the limited liability for salt use, and they really have a lot of positive things to say. There's 2 new bill authors in the House and the Senate that have brought a lot of new energy to that, and they've found consensus between Minnesota watersheds, the trial attorneys, which was a big hurdle because of the limited liability clauses in the legislation. So they found consensus, and there's actually a letter that has been drafted that is being signed by Freshwater Society, the Stock Oversalting Group, the Minnesota watersheds, and the trial attorneys, and that's going to the bill authors to help support their desire to move that forward and go to committees. So it's moving. It might not finalize this session, but they're feeling very positive about the direction. So that was a lot of the focus of the updates. There's also one of the other big things is the 103D legislation, which is our watershed law. That is, Bowser is supporting a housekeeping amendment to that that clarifies and kind of cleans up some of that language. So that seems to be moving through just fine.
Did they at all talk about open meeting or remote meeting?
No, that's no, not this session. I think one of the topics of discussion around that has been the League of Minnesota Cities and having them drive that, and of course us supporting.
Yeah, I didn't know if that came up just in passing that they were going to do that or what.
It wasn't mentioned.
You can't cover everything.
Right. Yep. Yeah. So that was the biggest things that were discussed as part of that. The staffing update, I do have an update on that as well. We gave an offer and it was accepted. Her name is Ashley Ricci. She's her title, she's a project and program manager at Rice Creek Watershed District, and she'll be making the move over to Ramsey-Washington. So we're really excited. She's been there about 8 years. Brings a lot of really great project management and program management experience, and obviously it's a small world in the watershed, so we're familiar with her, and we're really excited. So she'll be starting May 1st.
Well, that's very cool. Congratulations. Any questions for Tina? moving forward to program status. I don't have a ton of questions myself. I don't know if other people do. I did have one request, and that's I like the street sweeping paper that was published in the link. That was recent, right? Is that correct?
Yes, yep, just this last one.
Would it be beneficial to bring that forward for just a review in depth, or do people want time to read the report? I skimmed it this morning about what I
Yeah,
did, but it was really interesting.
Certainly that was one of the questions I was gonna have for you, is if you want a presentation on that. He's definitely interested in doing that if you would like to.
I mean, we've increased that particular budget over 2x, right? So it seems like it's a very effective BMP that is going to have additional investments over time. I think having a presentation would be merited. That's my opinion.
I would second that. That would be a worthwhile presentation, but I would acknowledge that it looks like there's a number of other topics, so timing for it might
It
seem
seems like
somewhat
towards the
flexible.
later when we're doing budget discussions is
Yeah.
Yeah.
preceding it. Agreed. Any other questions or comments about program status?
Maybe, just I don't know if it's an appropriate comment for the street sweeping, but because of the funding there, I don't know if, is there a request for the benefiting communities to provide some measurable or like outreach, educational outreach?
Not specifically educational, I guess. So most of the cities have asked us for assistance with that. So we'll be helping, Lauren's going to work on some tools that cities can use. But they all have to submit measurable, like weights collected and details on what material they collect.
The only reason I bring it up is because if this was the right one, there was comments about people like additionally sweeping their leaves into the
Into the street.
into the street. So I mean, that's not the intent, to help people reduce their.
Yeah, that came up at the Public Works Forum meeting we had when we brought all our cities together to talk about the future of their street sweeping work. That was one of the comments that I think White Bear Lake brought up.
It's not an uncommon one. I mean,
No.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
just,
most cities won't, like, people will call and say, hey, when are you gonna sweep my street? And they won't tell them because that's what happens.
I think it's kind of a past tradition of
Yeah.
sorts that we need to move into the future. Because-
Yeah.
So education is really needed.
Yes, yeah, so it's on Lauren's communication plan for this year.
Any other further comments on the project status?
I would assume we're gonna probably see this more as a item of budgeting, but the chloride reduction element here really eye-opening and interesting, and just the points about education and provision of tools, and I see that just like street sweeping, we're given the means to do it, and it just seems like it would fit so well. But like I said, the goals are there, they're great. So I'm guessing we'll probably see it more when budget comes around.
It'd be nice to tie that into the action that we talked about with when we bring chloride back up.
Yeah.
That would be nice.
Yeah.
I didn't know that it was effective at different temperatures also, that just.
Yeah, so this study was sparked, you can see in the beginning here, so City of Oakdale reached out and they're looking into putting in this brine maker and blending station. So it's kind of a preemptive.
Yeah.
Hey, let's look into this before they request, City of Woodbury, before they request grant funding. City of Woodbury partnered with South Washington Watershed District on what I'm assuming will be a similar system 2 years ago, so we can get some information from them too when this formally comes forward.
yeah, I mean, I've already voiced this in the past, but I think other groups have used stewardship funds to allow private contractors to perhaps go after chloride reduction, because that's after the government's, then the next, everyone keeps pointing the finger further and further down, and the one remaining large culprit perhaps or contributor is still in the private contractor. So whether or not it's a couple $1,000 here or there, apparently that's, there are potentials for big impacts. So just my
I
comment.
think that one of the topics that came up at the administrators meeting was Capital Region is embarking on a chloride management plan for their district. And I think it's something that we could potentially partner with them on, do together. We've had very similar outcomes, I think, for that.
It
And
seems
that
like
will
a lot of
look
the
at
metro
things.
ones, if we had some
Yeah.
participation, that would be very beneficial.
I think then we would look at things like cost sharing, education, and also potential rule changes. You know, there's a lot of, you know, the low self-design or there's a lot of things that we could incorporate together. So it's something I made a note of to talk with them about this one.
Any further questions on the project status? Moving to topic number 14 for manager comments next month's meeting. I know Tina and I've had conversations about the agenda. We'll make sure that as we look forward with all the things that we need to learn about prior to entering the planning session, we'll space them appropriately. That's the only manager comment that I was going to make.
I do have one more thing. I'm sorry that one of the managers that was part of my review, Lauren, I don't know if you're on, typically there's a statement given that we held a closed meeting.
That's right.
I apologize, I did not prep that ahead of time. I think typically it's, let me see if I can just pull up last year's statements.
We have to announce that we did a.
Yeah. Adding the language, so, Lauren, there you are. What is the statement that needs to be said regarding the?
Yeah, to confirm that a closed meeting was held to review the administrator's performance. I think typically you should say who was present at that closed meeting. And yeah, as long as it's noted in the record that it was held.
So there was a closed meeting to review the administrator's performance. Those present were myself, board member Benjamin Carr, board member Mark Ernest, and past board member Pam.
And
And Matt was also there. Thank you. Said all the other meetings, just that we had that closed door meeting,
Yep.
that assessment.
Yep.
No, so was that. Yes.
yes.
Wonderful. Well, may I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second. All right.
Third.
Thank you all.
Yes, thank you,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks.
Thanks.
You too.
Bye, Lauren.